Oh my god, you guys. Sorry, I'm gonna move the mic a little bit. Ugh. I'm really tired very suddenly. But I have to make this video now. This is the best opportunity today to do it. This is like not relevant to the topic of the video at all, but I'm gonna be playing the first HD Metroid in about 7 hours. I'm gonna be playing Metroid Dread in 7 hours. Holy shit, dude. Midnight release. Let's fucking go. See, I have my... I'm a little bit skeptical still about Dread. But I'm feeling the vibes right now. I'm feeling the hype a little bit. So I hope I'll enjoy it, I guess. But like I said, that's not the topic of the video at all. What I want to talk about today is branching narratives in games. Not because it's like especially relevant right now in any kind of way. My friend Björn made a video of the same topic the other day, and that really got me thinking about it. Mostly because it made me think about a bunch of things that didn't really come up in that video. It's been a while since I watched it, to be honest, so I can't really pick up from specific points in that video, but I guess it doesn't matter. See, the first thing that I thought about with this whole discussion even is that, damn, branching narratives, at least when I was growing up, when I was following games, right, when I first started really using the internet and reading opinions and fucking blogs and news and all this shit. It always seemed like branching narratives, or like how the fuck to do more modular stories in games, it always seemed like this holy grail, right? Because the limitations in that area were so obvious, right? We have never really had games that really, where it felt like satisfying, that felt like they responded to your actions in a narrative sense in a satisfying way. See, I think a lot of that might have been also because like the whole games as art thing was really big at the time, and just games getting more mature and all this fucking lame shit. Because obviously the only way to be art is for games to have explicit narratives, and anything that's more abstract or more mechanically driven, obviously that's not real art, man. That's not real art. I'm kidding, of course, for those who can tell. It's also around that time is when obviously fucking David Cage's games, Quantic Dream's games, whatever, got really big. I followed Heavy Rain's release and sort of the period leading up to the release very actively. And I'm just gonna say I was very excited for Heavy Rain before release, and when I played it I really liked it. But you also have to consider that I was 15. I was 15 when it came out. I think it's okay to have liked Heavy Rain when you're 15. Actually, I think it's still okay if you like it now, you know? I'm not gonna judge you. But obviously that's a goofy-ass game, right? In a lot of ways, but I still think, you know what, I still, as corny as David Cage is, and I don't think Quantic Dream have made games that I think are particularly valuable to games, right? I still think Heavy Rain had pretty interesting ideas. I think the whole UI system is very clever. I think it genuinely creates tension in some moments. The thing with fucking cutting your finger off, I think that's still pretty, as an isolated set piece, that's pretty genius. Even though, again, I think it just illustrates how to really do it, because what fucking way you cut your finger off doesn't matter in the large scheme of things, right? And it's not even that the game is tricking you like it does matter. What makes the scene work isn't that the game is tricking you into thinking that it does matter. It's way more that you're so, for the lack of a better word, immersed in the situation. I know immersion is a fucking corny word and overused word, whatever. Just don't worry about it. You really don't want to see your character suffer, right? And well, maybe that's the thing. Maybe you even want the opposite, right? Maybe you want the most fucked up fucking way possible to cut off your finger. I mean, you want to see the most fucked up method of that. So that's a pretty interesting, narratively self-contained, open-ended fucking situation that I think I can really appreciate. And then even, that's the thing, I mean, there's a lot of set pieces in the game that once you know the trick, they really fall apart. I mean, where you're crawling through the glass tunnel, I mean, that doesn't fucking matter, right? You can't, it does not have, the only consequence is that you don't get the clue at the end, right, if you spend too long in the tunnel. But it's not like Ethan gets permanently injured or anything like that. See, it's interesting, I talked earlier about how, again, like I said, the idea of branching narratives was like this holy grail, and so many games were trying for it or finding more elegant ways to have that in their experiences. What was really funny to me was that the word choice in games was always connoted in a narrative sense, right? People always, when you talked about making choices in games, there was like always the sense that you're talking about narrative choices, right? People inherently assumed you're talking about narrative choices in games, even though it's funny. I remember reading this blog post, this blog that I followed. It was a German language blog about games. It's called kackreiz.net if you're interested. And the owner of that site really hated Halo. And he wrote a whole blog post about Unreal, right? And he was comparing Halo and Unreal, and like the comparisons were kind of shallow. And see, I can't have, his whole arguments hinged on the fact that, oh, like everybody who likes Halo, they haven't played Unreal, right? So obviously they can't fucking understand why I hate it. It's like, you're not even explaining it, really. It feels like you're not even really giving Halo its credit, kind of. And that's the thing, in fairness, I will say, yeah, I have not played Unreal. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that once I played it. A random internet blog guy. But anyway, he was saying, well, in any game you're making choices, right? In any first-person shooter that's like worth its salt, you're choosing between, oh, do I throw the grenade? Do I go left or right? Do I flank the enemy? Do I stay in cover? Blah, 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 blah. Those are all choices. And somehow, at that point in time, actually I think the blog post was not about Halo, I think it was about Heavy Rain, right? I think the blog post actually was about Heavy Rain, and he was explaining that in any game you're making choices, just not necessarily narrative choices, right? And even just the fact that in 2010, 2011-ish, it was not the self-explanatory thing, right? You had to specifically say what you meant with choices, because most people assume a choice is a narrative choice. I remember even, also funny, right? I remember explaining, actually, yeah, the context was that I was eating breakfast with my dad, and he was asking me, like, hey, what are you doing in college right now, blah, blah, and I was saying to him, yeah, I need to fucking analyze the first Resident Evil movie. My plan at the time was to go with Resident Evil, but then I had to go with Max Payne in the end, but whatever, right? That doesn't matter. I actually made that Max Payne video. I made a whole Max Payne movie video analysis. Maybe I'll link that here. It was actually pretty fun. But yeah, at the time I said to him Resident Evil, and then I sort of explained why I wasn't interested in the Resident Evil movies sort of inherently. And then I explained sort of what you do in the games, right? That you choose your route, and you choose what items you take with you, and you choose whether to kill zombies or just walk past them. And that last part was kind of a sticking point, because my dad thought, okay, so what does that do? Right? My dad was like, what does that do? What's the point of it? Does it actually influence the story in some way? And that is so interesting to me, because, again, for me it kind of showed that so many people don't, and I mean, it's my dad, right? He doesn't really play video games, right? So I don't, let's be fair to him, right? Don't be mean to my dad in the comments. So many people, they don't think about games as systems, right? They don't think about games systemically. They don't think about the nitty-gritty interactions they're doing. A lot of people are just primarily concerned with the result, right, of their actions, the immediate sort of narrative result and the narrative as a reward. And I guess Resident Evil is an interesting example in this context because Resident Evil does actually have a branching narrative, right? It has multiple endings. But it wasn't really relevant to what I was saying at all, right? And it's not something that I personally care that much about in that game. It's really hard to explain to a lot of people why those micro gameplay choices are actually interesting, right? And I have a similar disconnect. Oh, God. Somehow I always find a way to talk about JRPGs. But yeah, I have a similar disconnect with people who don't understand why I don't like turn-based combat. Because to a lot of people, I think action combat, for example, even though I think a lot of people don't realize how many little tiny choices they're making, right? And how many little variations there are in an average action game combat encounter. And the fact that RPG combat is inherently so much more linear doesn't really process for most people because they care more about the result in the first place. So I think that kind of difference in perspective illuminates pretty well why that was such a desired thing in the first place, branching narratives. But I think it also, just now that I've laid it out like that, I think it's the next logical step in this chain is to say, oh, well, games are inherently a systemic medium, right? And obviously I'm talking about computer games. Why did I say computer games? That's the Matthew Matos's brainworms. Yeah, computer games, video games, digital games, right? In my study program, whatever, we refer to them as digital games. Our media studies lecturer actually made a very important distinction that the video component is not actually important, right? The fact that they're digital and that they can represent a system is what's important. And that's something that that's why I'm specifying video games, whatever, digital games, because that's not something you really have in that way in real life, I guess. I mean, real life is a system, but it's not an artificially crafted, curated system, right? When I'm having a sports competition and suddenly it starts raining, obviously there's reasons for that, right? But it's not like it's not like the game designer, the person that created this game, right? The marathon, whatever, that they created a rain system that can interfere at any time. No, it's just a random part of life. Whereas in a video game, we can decide what systems are part of the experience, and then that creates dynamism. See, and the problem is that obviously a written story with pacing, with characters, with a specific theme, right? That the game is sort of, well, no, that the story is trying to convey to the audience is very inherently not systemic, right? Let's say I have an enemy in a game, right? Let's say I have an elite in Halo. It's very easy for the game to represent this elite just walking. I can give the elite some kind of stimulus. I can shoot at them from a specific direction. And then there, we can just give them an AI response that if I'm shooting at them, they will always walk backward, right? While I'm shooting at them, for example. And since I'm controlling the direction from which I'm shooting, I could theoretically just make the elite do whatever I want, right? I could make them walk into a trap that way. I don't have to craft a specific interaction that's elite walking into a trap, right? I just have to give them this basic behavior. Yeah, they can walk certain directions. And then give them just some kind of basic reactions when they hit the trap, right? And even that could be systemic, right? That the trap is just an explosion, for example, and then the elite has one specific reaction to explosions, right? And then depending on where the explosion is coming from, it's like it can be subtly different, and that's dynamic gameplay, whatever. Let's say instead of just walking or whatever, I want the elite to have a verbal reaction based on where I hit them. So if I hit one of their legs, they say one line. If I hit one of their arms, they say one line. If they hit their head, they say a different line. In that instance, instead of the reactions just being a result of the system, I have to create a completely new thing, a completely new asset, just to cover those bases, right? I would have to write those lines and then have someone voice those lines. Obviously, I could be clever with it, right? I could just maybe have one sound and then pitch it slightly differently depending on where the lead was hit, right? But obviously then I'm trying to apply this to stories, right? Where you can't... Yeah, with a written story, inherently, you would have to handcraft every single possible outcome, right? The outcomes can never really be systemic because, again, the nature of what you're trying to do is a written, crafted story. So yeah, like I was trying to say, the very nature of games is that you can you create the system and then the system creates your outcomes, right? But when you're trying to tell a story, you have to create the outcomes. And when you're trying to create a lot of different outcomes, number one, you will just never match what a system like that could do. And number two, generally, it's just way too much fucking work, right? So I realize that's something like Cyberpunk, right? Cyberpunk, I haven't played it yet, but it kind of promises a very similar thing, like, oh shit, like everything can react to you, and there's so many fucking different branches, whatever, right? And yeah, Detroit Become Human is another example, probably, right? That I actually was told that it has a surprising fucking number of outcomes, and that it's pretty crazy for that kind of game. And I guess that's respectable, right? But it's the kind of thing that you can only solve with budget, right? That's the only thing that it improves, just the more time you spend on it. It's not the kind of thing you can actually ever solve with tech innovations, with even just design ingenuity, right? Because again, what you're trying to do to have these handcrafted outcomes to a lot of different situations is very linearly tied to workload. Obviously, you could do something, you could cut the workload a little bit if you do something that's entirely text-based, but it's still the same problem. I think it's something that personally I'm just not very interested in, because to me it goes against the whole nature of games in general. It doesn't really take advantage of what games are good at. You'll always just get something way more compelling if you play to the strengths of the medium. There was this Ken Levine GDC talk that really fascinated me. It was about the idea of narrative Legos. So I just paused this recording to look at the Ken Levine talk for a little bit to just refresh myself. And it's funny because he said all the same shit that I just told you. Obviously way more efficiently and way more eloquently. I think when I first watched that, I didn't really get all that stuff, right? He for example, he says that in a linear narrative-driven game, in a linear narrative generally, that's not systemic, the individual pieces of the narrative don't talk to each other. And that's like something I could tell you, when did this come out? Wait. 2016. So not even that long ago. What? Yeah, I must have watched this when I was like 22, something like that. I think I still didn't really get it like I do now. Definitely encourage you to give that a watch. But his idea basically boiled down to, he was explaining it in the framework of this sort of medieval open world fucking fantasy RPG. He was using Skyrim as a template because it's just easy to understand. And he was saying, okay, let's assume that all these different non-playable characters, let's assume they have passions, right? There's one character maybe that he just hates elves. And anything that you do that's sort of related to that, either helping elves or killing elves, will change their outlook, this character, the fucking blacksmith, whatever, their outlook on you. See, and that's a way that you can have a developing story with this character without necessarily needing specific interactions, right? Anything that's sort of related to elves will have an impact on your relationship with this character, and then what this character can do to you based on that relationship can progress relatively linearly, right? They will... the example that Ken was using is that they will give you discounts in their shop, or they will offer you help in battle. And that sounds super obvious, right? But I think it really is something that fits the whole aesthetic and the whole nature of games way better, and it fits... there's a very intrinsic connection between the narrative and the mechanics, right, in the sense. Especially, again, you build this relationship with this character and then you immediately get a mechanical benefit from it, right? And it feels very natural, and it is genuinely dynamic. And it really does feel like something that games aren't truly leveraging yet. See, an obvious point of comparison would be something like Persona, right? Where you build relationships with the characters, and then they will help you, whatever. But it's so much more linear and so much less systemic by comparison, right? You can only... The game gives you very specific ways that you interact with the characters, that you level up the relationship. And the payoffs of that relationship are also very defined and very handcrafted. And if you can think of a game that really leverages that idea in a way more systemic way, I would love to know. But I don't know, I think as designers, or even as narrative designers, right, I think a lot of people are just way too attached to this idea that a story has to be handcrafted to be valuable, right? And I guess, you know, I do actually, I mean, a linear story obviously has value, right? Obviously, you can deliver a theme or a message to the audience way more concisely and way more precisely when the story is handcrafted, right? But maybe we need to sort of divorce ourselves from the idea that games have to do that exact thing. Maybe games can be more abstract, and I guess you get out of them what you put in. I think overall that's just a way healthier relationship with the player. And see, that's the thing. Maybe that's... I say that, and I realize that's not what a lot of players actually want. A lot of players do just want a linear story, and they maybe want some alternative endings, whatever, right? They don't really see the appeal of something that is more systemic, right? I know, personally speaking, that over the years, over the last couple years especially, I've latched on more and more to games that have longevity, right? That have that dynamic, replayable quality to them. And that's why I just care less and less about linear stories in games. I always use a game like DMC3 as my example, because people always put up DMC3 as like, oh, it's like the most balanced DMC game, has the most impactful story, cool setting, pretty polished gameplay, whatever, pretty expressive gameplay as well. And it's like, it's not the best at most of those things in the series, but because it's the best overall package, it's the best DMC game. And it's just like, I don't think it works like that for me, to be honest with you. And I guess that's the thing. If the story really means something to you in your core, then I guess I get it. That you still have that deep attachment to the game, and that makes you like it more than the rest of the series, for example. But personally, I just know that the more I play a game, if I'm naturally drawn to play a game more, then I probably like it more. And then at that point, does the story even fucking matter? Because I know I'm just skipping the cutscenes every time, right? And that's why if you look at my favorites list over the years, you will see that just these like linear, more story-driven games, they just get lower and lower in my estimation. And then what goes more and more up is games that I just play a lot, right? Games that I've spent a long time playing recently. And that's why, as far as like thematic, experiential, you might even say more narrative-driven games go, these days I just find stuff like Rain World or even Eco or The Last Guardian, which those last two, they are linear games, right? But the story and the themes are so much more abstract and so much, it's more about soaking up the vibes, right? And just being in the world. I think that suits my sensibilities just way more these days than I have my gameplay and then I watch a cutscene and then blah, whatever. At some point I'm gonna stop fucking caring about the cutscenes. I'm sorry. Whereas in a game like Rain World, I still haven't finished it, but you feel what the game's trying to tell you in every fiber of its mechanics, right? When you're controlling your character, you feel what the game is about, right? And yeah, like we need to look at it less linearly than, oh shit, the game is like trying to say something really deep with like this one gameplay segment, and like, ooh, like the fact that you have to press the button is like super crazy. Like I guess a good example is I don't want to shit on the guy, right? But Gaming Red made this comparison that, not a comparison, but like he posed this idea that like, oh, maybe the Roxas intro in KH2, maybe it's intentionally super drawn out to make the anticipation for when Sora comes back, spoiler I guess, to make that way more impactful. And like, I get it, I think that makes sense, blah 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 blah, right? But does that actually matter that much? You know? Is that actually at the forefront of my mind when I think about this experience overall? No, not really. At least, again, speaking for myself, right? Whereas with a game like Rain World, I guess the best way I can put it is that the form is the function, yeah? It's a game about surviving and being this underdog creature, right? And that is actually perfectly transplanted into the mechanics, right? You actually are literally surviving and gathering and eking out a habitat for yourself, right? In that game. The game didn't need to explicitly tell you with words, okay, this is what you're supposed to fucking feel or whatever. Yeah, this has turned into ramble. I think this was like kind of more chaotic and less structured than I was hoping for. But I hope you still got something out of it. I hope the point was still clear that I was trying to make. That, again, we need to leverage the unique strengths of games a little better, I think. And all this branching narrative stuff, it feels like a dead end in game design. It does, like I said, it's not something you can actually improve, right? It's not something that actually is going to get easier as technical possibilities are improved. So that's why we just need to think outside the box. We need to go back to the drawing board and think about, okay, what can we actually do with the systems that we have? Yeah, another tight 30 minutes. I'm happy with that. Okay, goodbye. I'm gonna play Metroid.